What's up, everyone? Jared back again, sipping on a delicious beer, and I figured let's answer some more questions. So this one comes from the perspective of a prospective clinical instructor, and the focus of the question is, I haven't hosted a PT student for a clinical rotation before. What should I think about, and what should I do to make the placement as positive and as impactful as possible for that student? So for me, at this point in my career, I've hosted 8 clinical placements. 3 of them were split, so I had another clinical instructor working with me, and the 2 of us were responsible for one student, but the rest were all me. They were just solo, or I was the solo clinician working with that singular student. So over the course of these placements, I've been able to refine and identify the things that I think have been extremely helpful for me as the clinician. But most importantly, I've been able to get feedback from the students that I've been working with to see what they found were the most helpful for them and what they think could be changed for the better so that the next students coming down the line will be able to reap the benefits. So this won't be comprehensive because I'm going to try to keep the video fairly short, but I'll at least hit on a few things that I think are really important. So the first thing is I found it extremely important to make sure that I'm setting aside at least an hour, some substantial amount of time at the start of the day, on day one, before patients start coming in, so that I can just sit down with the student, get to know them, and we can set expectations with each other, as well as orient the student to the environment, to where the equipment is, the layout of the facility, the other staff members, stuff like that. So I would have already had some back and forth with the student because they would have reached out through email to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is my background. They would have confirmed the dates that their placement spans, the hours they're going to work. They probably would have asked if there's anything that they need to do to prepare in particular for this placement. So we would have already had a chance to sort of feel each other out initially. I think it's the same with a student as it is with any new client that we'd be working with clinically. When we meet them, especially for the first time, we can make the best impression if we aren't distracted, if we can just sit down and genuinely care about finding out about them, finding out about what they think, what they care about, what they want to get out of the overall experience while they're on placement. So even if it means coming in early, even if it means blocking off some treatment time and you see 1 or 2 fewer patients that day, I think it's really important and imperative to do just to make sure the placement gets started off on the right foot. The second thing that I would suggest, and that students have told me they found really helpful, was having time set aside every day, formally or informally, to just talk, to debrief about the people that you're working with, the cases that you're seeing, the decisions that you made as a clinician, or even the decisions that they're making as students, and to have this back and forth, this dialogue that continues so that the student can understand more of your thought processes and vice versa. And then the idea being that moving forward, if you know where the other person is more clearly and you both have your expectations set clearly, then you can both make decisions that are mutually beneficial for you as the clinician and for them as the student. So I've had a few students say to me that just making sure that I went out of my way to touch base with them between patients, between appointments, and say, hey, any questions about the morning? Any people that we saw that you had some thoughts on? Let's talk about it. Or at the end of the day, when we're packing up to go home, making a point to ask them, did you have anything that you wanted to ask me about or talk about today or about the rest of the week? It opens the door for them to potentially fire off questions or thoughts that they might have been holding on to, but maybe there wasn't an opportunity earlier, but it could lead to some really, really formative and productive conversation. So that would be number 2. Make sure that you're setting aside enough time each day to talk about stuff. The last thing that I'll mention here is that as a clinician, I think the single most important thing that you can do is to make it extremely clear with your words at the outset, and then consequently with your actions following that, to make yourself open to criticism and questioning. I've had some of my most recent students tell me, they were senior students, they were on their last placements, that previously they didn't feel like it was appropriate to bring up questions about why the clinician was doing what they were doing. They didn't feel like they had that freedom, or they felt that if they did do that, the clinician was going to be mad. There is a power dynamic at play. The clinician is going to be doing evaluations at midterm and at final. So let's not get that twisted. That's there, and the student is acutely aware of it. So that is another factor that they're considering when they're deciding whether or not they want to ask you or to question why you've done something a certain way. So on day one, when I've set aside that time to talk with them, I tell them explicitly that I thrive on transparency and that I really want them to be as comfortable as they choose to make themselves in questioning what I do, in suggesting other ways of doing things, and in bringing forward any information, any articles, any research, any literature, any podcasts, and so on and so forth that they want to talk about or that they're not sure of, just so that they and I can discuss it together. That suddenly gives them permission to just think and say what's on their mind. And I've had students, again, tell me at the end of placement that that was probably the single most impactful thing that characterized this placement, and that's what allowed them to get the most out of it. Just to finish up on that thought, I say the same thing to patients, not all the time, but that's implied, or that's at least how I operate with every patient that I work with. Whether I say it explicitly or not depends a little bit on the situation, but I hope that my actions convey that to every patient that I work with. And when I do bring this up explicitly, I tell them that being transparent does two things. One, it allows them to be more invested in the process. If I were the patient being treated, I would want to know why we're doing what we're doing. Because if it made sense to me, then I would be able to buy into it more and give it more effort and be that much more trusting in the process because it makes sense and I think it's going to work. The second thing is that it doesn't allow me to BS anybody. Because if I can't think of a good reason to do what we're doing, there is absolutely a better use of our time and resources. And the same is true for students. If they ask me why I've done what I've done, I might have a fantastic reason. And it gives me an opportunity to think about what that reason or those reasons might be and communicate that. In short, it makes me a better clinician and a better person because now I have to articulate and explain myself, articulate my thoughts and explain my rationale for why I'm doing what I'm doing. So there you go. There are three of the most important things that I think any clinician, new or pre-existing clinician, should be thinking about and then putting into effect. I'd be willing to stake a lot of money that if those things are put into effect, your incoming students will thank you and will reap significant benefit from it. So there you go. Hope that was helpful. If you ever have any questions, feel free to fire them off to us here, and we'll do our best to get back to them. Cheers, y'all.